Technical difficulties. We couldn't get my laptop to project correctly, so I'm going to have to wing a little bit of this. There's a lot of mystery in paintbrushes for a lot of you, and there was for me when I first started, trial and error, and switching from using cheap brushes that came with the watercolor tin to something a little more formidable really was what made a big difference. But also knowing what each brush does and its job. I'm going to first talk about the different shapes of brushes. We have rounds, which would be like this Kolinsky Sable. The whole brush is round, the ferrule's round. Then we have what's called a bright, and that's when they have a flat top on the top. I don't have a whole lot of use for brights. Then we have what I call, some people call them cat's paw, but they're also called filberts, and they're very useful in a lot of different ways. And then you have fan brushes. And you can see I have a few different kinds here. And then I have what I call my blenders, which are badger hair natural bristle brushes that have slant tips and flat tips on top. So this would be a bright, this would be a slant tip. And then I have blenders, which are completely round and come to a point in the center. They've been shaved and can be used to do some really nice blending. And then you have your basic pastry brushes, or you can find these at the hardware store. You paint your windowsills and such with them. These are used for doing application of sealers. So you have your different shapes of brushes, and like I said, I don't have a whole lot of use for the flat bright. There's not a whole lot of straight things that are on a duck or a bird. Another thing that a lot of people don't realize is that they should never be mixing their paint with their brushes. We're all guilty of this when you first start, but that's when you start paying $20, $30 for a brush, you're going to learn real fast. You're not going to be mixing with that brush anymore on your palette. So I started out with this basic flexible, very flexible palette knife, and it works well, but I found when I started doing a lot more painting that sometimes I don't want to mix what it takes to use this palette knife. It's, you just need much more paint for it to actually work. So these pointed palette knives that are lifted up off of the surface keep my hand off, and I can mix the smallest, tiniest amount. I can pick up the smallest amount of, say, iridescent powder to add. So these are very useful. They also scrape your palette really well when you're done and you need to clean up your palette. So you have your different shapes of brushes, and I find that the filberts and the rounds are what I've used the most. Then there's the materials that the brushes are made out of. These are what are called Taklon, and you can use these with oils and acrylics. It's a synthetic brush. The thing that's nice about these is they really replicate like a Kolinsky Sable. This one probably cost $8, going on down in size. I have all sizes all the way down to 0. I didn't bring them all. Most of the time I find that a synthetic brush is too slippery. It won't hold onto the paint, it just lets it slide right off too fast. Where when you're using a natural bristle brush, there's scales on the hair follicles, then they actually hold paint for you. So a natural bristle brush like these are made out of boar's hair, horse hair, hog hair, and then they have some properties to them that you don't find, that you could not take this brush here, which is basically the same shape, these two brushes, same shape, same size, but this brush would be a great brush for taking and putting on light, just tapping back edges of feathers on in a quick manner, where this brush, I wouldn't use that for it. I could take and scrub with this brush. I can do blending with this brush. I can pull with this brush. But this one is more useful for actually putting washes on, because it's really soft. It's got a softer feel to it. If you want to come up when you're done and feel the differences in these brushes, it is important to what you're going to do, how stiff the brush is, how coarse the brush is, how fine the brush is, and how it actually tapers at the end. Now, my absolute favorite brushes are Kolinsky Sables. They're the most expensive. I've got a 12 here that I bought probably back in 1989, and one I bought in 2016. I've used this one a couple of times, and this one I've used a lot, but it's the exact same brush. It's just that it's been worn down, and I never throw my brushes away. They only get a new job. They get reassigned. So where I would use this to tap on a smoothie, really fine feathers, because the back edge of this, and I could have shown you on the video, but it's not working. You can make very convincing, very quickly, feather patterns that will, and when you adjust the size with the brushes as you go up, you can go smaller, you can go bigger. I used to think that this is the only way to go, and a brush of Kolinsky Sable that was this size would be like $120. So finding something like this at $8, you know, technology's changed a lot in brushes, and you just want to make sure when you're choosing your brush that it can be used for the paint that you're going to be using, whether it's oil or watercolor or acrylics or gouache. Acrylics are really hard on paintbrushes. I didn't really realize until I started reading up for doing this presentation how hard acrylic paint is on our brushes. They tend to, that acrylic paint tends to stick in and on the bristles, where with oils and a watercolor they slip off and come off quite easily. So the other thing that is important to note about brushes is that when you're painting on wood, whether it's textured or if it's smooth, it's really hard on the brushes. So, you know, I'll start out with a number 3 Raphael 8408. This is probably the favorite of almost every master wildfowl carver I know. Will turn into a tool that I couldn't paint little loon dots on with this without the point of it just making little lines all over every time I try to do a little dot. So my older one has the tip all worn down and it's round, so I can take and roll that brush and have a rounded end instead of a pointed end. So the job has changed from being a fine split drawing brush, painting brush, to a application for dots or thicker lines or outlining your feather layout. When I lay out my feathers on, say, like the old squaw, that all took, you know, individual feather I say a place for every feather and a feather for every place. I mean, it has to all work out if you're going to paint a decorative smoothie. So when I use really thin Deco Art Traditions acrylic paint, I'll use my rounded old Kolinsky Sable to lay out those feathers. Then I'll come back after they've been dried, and I'll take one of these worn older brushes, and I get it wet and keep it clean and have a paper towel, and I can take and thin down that line that and just remove portion of that line that I just drew on. Maybe it's overlapping on another, and I have to decide which one's going to be on top, which one's going to be on the bottom. And I'm so sorry I don't have what I was going to demonstrate to you, this actual technique. So I can go back and rearrange and thin down these lines and take them off and start over if I want until I get it exactly the way I want it. Then I can come back and make a lot of more detail can be added. I'm feeling a little hindered here by not being able to show you the things that I had planned on showing you. They have specialty brushes. These work really well for getting underneath your primaries and into little certain areas where you just can't reach in. I had to use that on the...
So what are those called, or just right angle? Or?
They're like right angle brushes, yeah. Oh, I think that is, okay, this one's called a tight spot. Lowell Cornell 7670 tight spot. And this is an 0, and the other one's a 5/0. These are blending brushes that I got from Kurt's Waterfowl Corner, and these work really great with oils or acrylics, but particularly with oils when I'm painting on a decorative like the loon. That soft transition of color that goes from black to lighter brown, and you don't want to see any hard change in color. This is just an excellent blending brush to be able to softly, so I will take and I'll do my blending, and I'll have my paper towel and wipe it off, come back, do my blending, going back and forth.
Go back just 1 second. Those tight spots?
Yes.
What's the hair?
Low Cornell, is that what you want?
What is it, a hair or fiber or something?
Oh, this is synthetic, I believe. These are synthetic. If the brush is expensive, then it's probably a very good brush, but being able to hand pick those brushes, you're kind of taking a risk when you're ordering them online, and then you're also taking a risk if you're going to a show and maybe they don't have the ones you really want, or there's an issue with those that they haven't taken care of them. You go to Michael's and half the time they don't have a good Sable, and if they do, somebody's taken the cover off and put it back on, the protector, and wrecked them. So artistpaintbrush.com is a really great resource for brushes. Blick is another one for the expensive Isabis and the Raphaels. With Blick, what I do is I save up the things that I need, and then I find a coupon like on Retail Me Not or whatever, and it gives me free shipping after a certain amount. And so you can really, if you wait and save up the things you want, or you find a buddy that also needs to order some stuff, you can combine and save a lot of money. But you're never going to walk off the street into Blick and Edina and find what you want without paying twice as much as you'd pay if you were buying it online with the coupon and free shipping. So there's advantages to being able to pick out things, and other advantages for saving money by not being able to pick them out. I haven't had any bad luck with Blick ordering my Isabis, my really expensive Isabis, and those are 61/68 All of this is in my book. All of these brushes are listed in my Common Loon book with the chicks. But at Artist Paintbrush, I was also able to find these, what they call, these are Royal Majestic, and these are the tiniest little filberts. And they work really well for, like I did a hummingbird and smoothie that I needed to be able to paint individual feathers on. And so these worked out really well for that. They're very durable, and they're like about $2 each. So if you order them a dozen at a time, and these are called a monogram brush, and they come in 20-aught and 30-aught. These are 30-aught, and you can see how, when you come up and take a look at all these brushes, you can see how fine they are. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I've missed. Kurt's, these rounded brushes, and Kurt doesn't really sell them anymore, but I found a replacement by Royal Langnickel. It's the 5005 Royal Sable. This is a size 6, and I would imagine they go up and down. These are really great for blending bills, like say on a redhead drakehead, like I've got over there. There's this subtle change of color that happens just before the black on the tip. It's really white, and to change from the blue of the bill and going into that leading edge where you have your lightest light next to your darkest dark, which is where that occurs, you're able to blend that softness in the oil paint using this kind of a brush that can go around in a circle or can be tapped. I do a lot of tapping to make natural looking blending going on a bill or other areas. The video I was going to show you, I had done a short-eared owl, had painted all the feathers in white, and for a soft color, I came back with this brush and a real thin yellow ochre, and I shaded each one of those feathers very softly. It looked just like I'd done an airbrush on it. These videos I keep referring to are on YouTube, and you can find them on the back of this card. So the other one was showing you how I can put the outline of all the feathers and then come back and thin them down or adjust their shape, or without having to take everything off. I can just take a little bit off and make those adjustments accordingly. So does anybody have any questions?
Any do's and don'ts for brushes?
Yes. Okay. Well, okay. The first thing is don't mix paint with your brush. The other thing that I do is I have a tinting. It's for hair tinting. When you go to the beauty shop, it's got a separation down the middle. So I have dirty water and I have clean water when I'm working with acrylic paint. So when I'm working on something and I'm painting and I'm going to switch my color, I go and I wipe my brush with my paper towel first. Then I go into the side that I'm actually using to clean my brush. And then the other side's just used for dipping. So that always remains clean, and then you've got the least amount of paint is going into the side that you're swishing your brush in. The better you take care of your brushes, the better they're going to do for you. When I'm done painting and I've washed them out, what I'll do is I use Dawn when I'm using oil, and I use Dawn always, but it's really important that you don't use a lot of Dawn because you'll end up getting suds if you're scrubbing and doing some blending. That way it'll start foaming up on you. That means you didn't rinse your brush out very well. So you want to be sure and rinse it out with really hot water, and then once you squeeze out all the water, if you'll take and just use a little bit of saliva and then pinch that brush real thin, just like a razor. The saliva will harden and it will save the shape of your brush exactly the way you want it. On real fine brushes like this Raphael, you want to be sure and point it out and put a little protector on it. I lose them all the time, and then I have to find new ones, but it's worth, doing something to protect those brushes so that you don't wreck them. When it comes to oil paints, I will use turpentine. I use lacquer thinner to clean my brushes. I'm painting with turpentine, and I'm painting with Grumbacher medium number 1, and all of that wipes out really well. And then when you're all done with that, then I come back and I use a lacquer thinner. That's it. Don't go in. You don't need to use Dawn to clean that brush out anymore. It's going to be just fine after it's dried. You can kind of bristle the brushes and go ahead and repoint them after they're dry, of course. You don't want to be eating turpentine and lacquer thinner. And if that bothers you, you can also put it on your hands and wipe it. Spit in a little jar and do it,
So is lacquer thinner just a little stronger than turpentine or something?
Yes. And some people use mineral spirits. I don't care for how oily mineral spirits are, so I tend to like the lacquer thinner for my cleanup of all my projects. I use a glass pie plate as my oil painting palette. It's easy to cover up, and with another pie plate, and like I said, you can scrape it really well in the end. Then I'll put lacquer thinner. After I've scraped as much as I could, I'll put lacquer thinner in there and let it set for a little while, and got a brand new plate again. I use the Masterson Stay Wet palette for doing my acrylic painting. It'll hold my paint for 120 days, and it looks just like I covered it. If you set it up right, you follow directions, and you use the microwave to heat up the paper like they tell you to. It'll keep your paint. It's amazing. So I've used more paint, less paint in 3 years than I have in the entire 15, 20 years that I was using, I should say 30 now, years that I've been painting. It was amazing how much you throw away. And with the Masterson palette, there's a small one I use, there's a larger one. Be sure and get the one that seals it, not the red one, but well worth the investment, and it's pretty cheap, $13. So. Any other questions?
So do you paint with acrylic also?
I paint with acrylics and oil, depending upon what it is I'm painting. If I'm doing a decorative smoothie, well, I do them in oil and I do them in acrylic. But if it's going to be really highly detailed, I usually, like my old squaw with the tail that was up, that was all acrylic. Where with my oils, I'm doing things like that redhead over there where all the detail has already been put into the piece. It's just a matter of putting the color in the right place. So.
How about a palette for acrylics? Do you use something different than you use for oils? Just use
That was the
paper?
Stay Wet palette. The Stay Wet palette that I was talking about it's a plastic palette with a cover, and it's got a sponge that's in the very bottom, and it's got this special paper, and you take the paper and you put it in the microwave, and you have to heat it up to, like I take a 9 by 13 glass casserole and stick it into my microwave, and it starts boiling, and as soon as it's hot, I can take it out and put it on top of that sponge, and then I fill the tray with water, and then you just tip it off until it stops dripping, so the sponge is still holding, and what it does is it moistens the paint from the bottom up, and it never dries on the top either. It took a little bit of getting used to because I was using white plastic plates, but those are not very ecologically good sound, and they're very expensive and hard to find these days, like the Solo 9-inch plates. So I use that Masterson for my acrylic palette, or a plastic plate. I use white because, you know, you'll find the red and the blue at Walmart 15 million times and never any white. But it would tint the color that I'm mixing. It could, you know, really, where if you're using the white, if you thin it out, you can actually see the color better if on a white surface. With my clear pie plates that I use for my oils, I have a white tag board underneath so that I can see that color on the pie plate. Any other questions? Well, feel free to come up and take a look at these brushes. This is like about a quarter of my brushes. I have 4 sets of, you know, these are the 12s. I have, you know, another 3 of these for each size that I've used over the 35 years I've been painting. So, like I said, if you buy a good brush, you don't really ever need to throw it away if you keep it well, but it just changes what you use it for. You know, and when I'm painting in oils on a decorative, I have to scrub the paint in really deep into all of that detail. So I can use this. I would never dream of using this same brush, just different stage. So this becomes a scrubbing brush, and this is a very fine detail feathering brush, or really soft washes, like if I'm putting iridescence. There's some subtle iridescence you can see on the redhead that was applied with this brush real softly and just kind of. So, okay, thanks.
Thank you.